Peace, family. It's your brother Marc Lamont Hill. Happy New Year once again. Happy New Year. If I didn't see you earlier, Happy New Year. Welcome to the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel. We are entering 2024. It's the first day of 2024. It's a new year, but it's the same struggle. So we here every single day doing the work, doing the labor of helping liberate our minds, complicating our ideas, making our conversations more in-depth, and helping change the tenor and tone of this country, in fact, of this world. That's what we're here to do today. And some big news coming out of Israel just in the last few hours. We have seen an announcement by the Israeli Supreme Court where they have, by a vote of 8-7, I should say a ruling of 8-7, the Israeli Supreme Court struck down a very, very, very important law. For those that don't know, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been attempting for the better part of his most recent term as prime minister, and he's had a bunch of them, to overhaul the judiciary. He's effectively trying to shift the way the country's judicial system works. Now, in Israel, there is a goal to have an independent judiciary that keeps the government in check, that keeps the legislature in check, that keeps the Knesset in check, that keeps the prime minister in check. Not that different than the system of checks and balances we talk about here in the United States. So imagine if the president says, you know what, I'm going to see if I can help advance a law, and I'm going to get all my colleagues to help me advance a law that makes the Supreme Court less powerful. It's shady on its face. It's funny style on its face. But when we dig more deeply, we can understand even more so. And we've seen this for a long time. Before October 7th, Israel was in a state of upheaval. People were in the streets every day, every week. There were marches in the streets. Israelis, people who were identified as liberal, people who identified as middle of the road. Even some conservatives said Netanyahu has gone too far by trying to overtake the judicial system. This is a key thing. But you'll be shocked to know, sarcasm alert, that Netanyahu completely ignored the voices of the people. Netanyahu completely disregarded the will of the people. Instead, Netanyahu said, well, I am going to go forward with a law that will reform the judiciary. This law, which was passed in July, I want to say, in July, was a bill known as the Reasonableness Bill. Now, this idea of reasonableness is important. The Supreme Court had the power within the Israeli judicial system to overrule or cancel a government decision if they deemed it unreasonable. And you might say, well, what does unreasonable mean? It's vague. And that's what Netanyahu's people argue. This is vague. Unreasonableness means if the government advances a decision that does not properly take into account all appropriate factors and considerations, public policy impact. For example, if I make a law that doesn't impact the fact that it's going to disenfranchise half the country, if I make a law that doesn't take into account that it's going to cause physical or medical harm, that's going to shut down the economy, etc., that you can make a law based on reason. Now, this idea of basing a judicial decision on reason, or allowing reason to inform a judiciary's decision making, is not new. In the United States, remember, Israel's only 75 years old, but the American judicial system is also built on these kinds of logics, right? Beyond a reasonable doubt, the reasonable man standard. What would a reasonable man do? That's the language of Oliver Wendell Holmes. Now, of course, we say reasonable person, but they really meant a reasonable man, and they really meant a reasonable white man. But all of it is appealing to this idea of reason and some idea of what's right and what's wrong. This is the idea that people are talking about. And so Netanyahu said, nah, no longer do we want the court to be able to overrule the government. Now, you might say, well, why is that such a big deal? Well, it's a big deal for a couple of reasons. One, Netanyahu is facing corruption charges. Netanyahu is facing corruption charges. Netanyahu has been facing corruption charges for a long time. In his last tenure as prime minister, Netanyahu was looking at corruption charges. And so what do? He said, I'm going to fight like a dog to stay in office, because he knows the moment he's a private citizen, he's vulnerable. And when he was a private citizen, he fought to do what? To get back into the prime minister's seat. And he fought and basically compromised his own ideological principles. He compromised his own political values. He said, I will make a coalition with anybody except the Palestinian, of course. They're not going to join. They're not going to connect with Ayman Oda. They're not going to connect with the joint list, but they're willing to connect with anybody who will allow him to stay in power. This is a Donald Trump mentality. This is why Donald Trump and Netanyahu are such a strong bromance, because they both will do whatever they can to get in power. They both will sacrifice the people. They will sacrifice their politics. They will sacrifice anything as long as they can get in control and stay out of prison. And that's what they both trying to do right now. And so, yeah, it's a little funny that Netanyahu wants to change how the government works when the government has the capacity to keep him out of prison, as long as the courts don't jump in. And he said, well, you know what? I'll stop the courts from being able to jump in. Now, the way Israeli government works, it's about coalition building, right? It's not like Democrats and Republicans, right? It's not like we just control the House or the Senate. The Knesset doesn't work that way. So part of what, and the prime ministership doesn't work that way. So part of how Netanyahu was able to secure rule of the country again was to make a coalition with the right. When people say that this is the most right-wing government, this is the most right-wing government Israel's ever had, it's not even close. And we see this trend all around the country. We see it in Italy, we see it in Argentina just now. We see it, of course, in the United States. We've seen it in Brazil, Bolsonaro. We've seen it in India, right? The governments are moving more and more to the right, more and more authoritarian, less and less democratic. So that's what Netanyahu is attempting to do. And what better way to do that than to move with people like Ben Gvir, move toward with fascists, to move with right-wing extremists, to rule with the ultra-religious folk. So he basically got a crew of people that don't give a damn about democracy, that don't give a damn about liberation, that don't give a damn about freedom, and he got them all to strike down legally through this bill the Supreme Court's ability to fight. So that's just one thing, right? The government can't strike down a reasonableness law. Another thing is Netanyahu wants to weaken the power of the Supreme Court to review or throw out laws enabling a simple majority of one in the Knesset, that's the parliament, to overrule such decisions. He also wants to have a decisive say over who becomes a judge, including in the Supreme Court, by increasing its representation, the representation of the government on the committee which appoints them. So the government will pick the judges that will decide the government's actions. No independent force here. They're trying to shrink that independence. And finally, the government wants to scrap the requirement for ministers. When we say ministers, we mean cabinet members, right? To obey the advice of their legal advisors, guided by the attorney general, which they currently have to do by law, right? The idea here is to weaken all judicial oversight, to weaken all things. And so the Supreme Court looked at this and they said, wait a minute, this stuff sounds crazy. This sounds crazy. Now, it was a very tight decision, again, 8-7. You can't get no tighter than that. In fact, this is the first time that all 15 judges on the Supreme Court met together and had this type of decision in history. And in a decision of 8-7, the court struck down the law. And they said the reason was the severe and unprecedented harm to the core character of the state of Israel as a democratic country. They said, Netanyahu, your law is so bad and so problematic that it would harm the core character of the country as a democracy. Now, spoiler alert, Israel's not a democracy. Spoiler alert, all this fight over democracy and who can speak and who gets freedom and liberations, or liberty, that's all for people who aren't Palestinian for the most part. So let's be very clear here. Israel's not a democracy. This is not a victory for democracy. This is a victory for settlers. This is a victory for colonizers. This is a victory for anybody who is allowed inside of Israel, including Palestinian citizens of Israel, who comprise 18% of the country. But it is not for Palestinian people. This is not a victory for justice. This is a victory for, as they say, just us. But I'll keep going. The Israeli Supreme Court also ruled, or voted, however you want to say it, that they did have the authority to overturn basic laws. Netanyahu was trying to say that the Supreme Court couldn't overturn the basic laws. Now you say, what's a basic law? Basic law, Israel doesn't have a Supreme Court. Israel doesn't have a lot of stuff, right? They don't have established borders. They don't have a Supreme Court. They don't have a constitution, excuse me, and they don't have a constitution, and they don't have this, and so they don't have constitutional laws. They have basic laws, excuse me, right? They have basic laws, which have effective constitutional power. So the Supreme Court is saying, well, yeah, basic laws are effectively constitutional laws, and therefore we have the power to oversee these things. But they disagreed. Netanyahu was arguing, I want to be very clear, I'm trying to teach here. Netanyahu was arguing, as were his friends, that the high court doesn't have the power over legislation, over the legality of legislation. I'm not talking about passing bills. I'm talking about saying whether something's legal or not. That's the Supreme Court's job. And he's saying, nah, can you imagine? Let me put it differently. Can you imagine if Congress was deciding whether affirmative action was legal or whether Roe v. Wade was legal in the United States? Can you imagine that? This is the context we're talking about. This is the context we're talking about. Absolutely. This must be done by a judge, by a Supreme Court. That's the point, right? The Congress or the Knesset will pass laws or introduce laws, etc. But the Supreme Court decides if something is legal. They interpret the law. That is the point. But instead, Netanyahu has fought to do something different. Now, why is this relevant? Well, it's relevant for a few reasons. One, it reminds you that Israel is not only out of step with the global community in many ways, it is also out of step with itself. Even mainstream people who hate Palestinians, mainstream people who want Israel to remain an ethno-state, they still saying, yo, we're going too far with these bills, Netanyahu. Netanyahu is an extremist even to his own people, even to his own countrymen and women. We have to understand that. We also have to understand here that what Netanyahu was offering or attempting to do is a model that could be replicated around the world. Right here in the United States, we're facing a Trump presidency, potentially a rerun of Trump in 2024, where he might also be trying to undermine the Constitution. He may also try to change the law in such a way that he not only advances his interests, but long-term dismantles some of the most coveted and valuable parts of a so-called democracy. In Argentina right now, they just elected Milei, right? And he's making arguments about the past, and he's saying, oh, well, we don't know if he's referring to disappearances of people and mass killings as, you know, just part of war. He's understating the violence of what happened 30 years ago and 40 years ago as nothing almost. They're rewriting the history books. Sound familiar? In India, there's a war on Muslims. Sound familiar? In Brazil, there's a full-fledged authoritarian populist movement that's happening, that's taking away people's rights while sucking people into the wave of populism. I'm here to save you from the rich. I'm here to save you and protect you. I'm here to make sure that they don't come get you, except the president is the they, Bolsonaro. Why am I saying these things? I'm saying that there are patterns of anti-democratic behavior that are happening around the world. So we need to pay attention to what's happening in Israel so that we can understand what could be happening here and in other places around the world. This is not a small thing. Now, the Supreme Court has ruled in Israel, and it's a ruling that will matter, and it's a ruling that will stick, but it's not the only ruling. I got to remind you, there are other things on the table that are coming up soon that you got to think about. that they have to think about. And that's why Netanyahu's people are saying, oh my God. Itamar Ben Gvir, for example, this is anti-democratic. This is destroying the country. Netanyahu saying this is unfair. And other people are arguing, we're at war. How can you make these decisions while we're at war? War has a way of hiding contradictions. There's a way of creating a myth of unity and a myth of democracy. And so a lot of people, because they're afraid and because Israel is in a moment of leveraging a devastating military attack, a complete bombardment of Gaza right now, a lot of people are saying, let's just stick together, kind of like what happened under George Bush, right? George Bush is president. We're going to war, so we don't worry about the Patriot Act. Don't worry about our civil liberties. We're at war. But the Israeli Supreme Court kept going. They kept fighting. They kept pushing to make a ruling, and that was an important ruling that needed to be made. And it's an 8-7 ruling. It's a very, very surprising one for a lot of people. But I'm gonna keep going because there's something else important here. We must never. I'm gonna say. I said it at the beginning, and I'm gonna say it again because I don't want y'all to be confused at all about this Israeli ruling. The Israeli Supreme Court's ruling is a victory for democracy. It stops Netanyahu from becoming more anti-democratic. It stops Netanyahu from becoming more of a dictator. It also curtails some of the growing power of the extreme right wing and the extreme nationalists. Why is that important? Israel is an apartheid state. It always has been for Palestinians. Israel is a settler colonial project. It always has been. But we cannot pretend that there aren't moments that get worse and more intense and more unabashed and more unfettered. No juror number 6, again, it was 8-7, far from unanimous. In 2016, I believe, yes, 2006, let me think. I don't want to tell y'all no bad information. Last thing I want to do is give y'all bad information or make y'all somebody come back and fact check me on something minor when what I'm saying is right and exact. 2018 actually is when the nation state law was passed. I don't want to confuse the bill and the law. The nation state law effectively said that Israel was that Eretz Israel was, all right, let me back up. The nation state law basically was a law that codified Israel as an apartheid state. It lowered the status of Arabic to an official, of like a valued language, a priority language, but not an official language. But the bigger argument was that it said that basically settlement expansion was a natural right, a fundamental right of the Jewish state. In other words, that Israel didn't just have its own borders, which again are undefined, but that expansion into the West Bank and into Gaza or wherever they want, what they call Judea and Samaria, that all of that is within boundaries. It's part of Israel's calling. Israel, it said all of Eretz Israel, right? It said effectively that Israel is not a state of all of its citizens. It talked about growing and expanding the Jewish character of Israel. Why am I telling you these things? Well, this is a move that was celebrated by nationalists and ultra-religious folk. If those are now, and that's before the government coalitions were so right-wing, but they were moving that way. And we warned you about that in my book. Mitchell Plitnick and I, in our book, we warned you about this move toward the right in our book, Except for Palestine. But now, they're not even pretending. They're not even pretending to not be on that type time. And so, as they're moving to the right, if there aren't policies in place, they will create even more laws that justify settlement expansion, which is illegal. Even more laws that strip away and disinherit and dispossess Palestinian people. Now, Israel has shown that it doesn't care about international law, it doesn't care about global consensus. It's going to do what it's going to do. But these are real people on the ground who are suffering, and so we want to make sure that we create space for pushback, that we create space to install democratic mechanisms or to protect the democratic mechanisms that we do have. That is the job. So this is a victory for democracy, but let's not be intellectually or politically immature. We cannot be dishonest. The fight for democracy in Israel, the people who are marching in the streets in Israel for democracy are not marching for Palestinian people to get their homes back. They're not marching for settlement expansion to stop. They're not marching for the siege in Gaza that's been going on for 17 years to stop. They are not marching to create a single democratic secular state. No, they're marching for the right to live in a democracy for people who identify as Jewish, a democracy for people who have Israeli citizenship, a democracy for the 18% of the country who are Palestinian, what they call Arab citizens of Israel, but who still don't have the exact same rights and freedoms as Jewish Israelis. So let's not read the news headlines about the judicial victory for the left and think that it's the whole left. It's no different than telling a Native American that everybody has the right to vote in the United States now, right? That or to tell an enslaved African woman or a newly free African woman in the United States that Susan B. Anthony got us the right to vote. For who? Yeah, is that a step toward democracy? Sure, but not for the people catching the most hell. And so again, Israel overruling Netanyahu puts some pressure on Netanyahu. It puts some restrictions on Netanyahu. It puts some limitations on Netanyahu. It also puts a spotlight on Netanyahu in the global community. In the global community, that once again, what he's doing is out of step, even with his own country's laws. Even an apartheid state's court says what you're doing is anti-democratic. This is a major thing. And when you combine that with South Africa taking Israel to the International Court of Justice, we're starting to see, again, global attention being placed on Israel and its misdeeds, its legal misdeeds, its political misdeeds. This is important. Anyway, I want to break that down for y'all, let y'all know that this is a big deal. This is a big announcement. This is a big development, one that we should watch, but one that we should not over celebrate, right? Because again, if you're talking about Palestinian liberation, if you're talking about the creation of an actual democracy, this doesn't get you there. But it does create some mechanisms to stop maybe from moving further away. But we can never believe that Israeli democracy is going to include Palestinians simply through voting or simply through legislative decisions or simply through Supreme Court rulings. That ain't how it works. Now, we need more than that, and we're going to get more than that. Anyway, family, hit the like button if you agree. Hit the like button if you feel what I'm saying. Hit the like button if you're rocking with me. It's the new year, and we still, again, new year, same struggle. We're going to keep putting the spotlight on this stuff. We're going to keep applying pressure. We are not going to go back to October 6th. The world is now paying attention to what's happening in Palestine, and we're not going to stop putting pressure. We're not going to stop putting spotlights. We're not going to stop exposing people in power. Shout out to you, Naja. Thank you for joining the channel. Thank you for becoming a member of the Marc Lamont Hill channel. Yo, anybody else who wants to do that, I'm grateful. I appreciate you. We'd love to have more people do that. Hit the like button if you subscribe to the channel yet. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe right now. Also, some people ask how they can support the channel financially. Of course, you can always do the super chats. You can always do the super stickers and such. But you can also hit us direct at the Cash App to MLHTV. The benefit of that, of course, is that YouTube don't take its considerable cut and it goes straight to help building what we do. Again, that goes to Mumia Abu Jamal's podcast. That goes to expanding our platform, technology, editing, original video footage, etc. We do it all here. We're building. So please, 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 if you can, hit the subscribe button, become part of our family. Spread the word. A video came out this weekend called 5 Myths About Israel and Palestine. I'm going to say it again. A video came out called Debunked, 5 Myths About Israel and Palestine. If you haven't watched that video, please watch that video. It breaks down a lot of stuff. It helps you tear down talking points. And we back, and we back, and we back, and we back. Like I said, make sure you check out Rabatin. Love that name. Love that name. Thank you for the shout out, Naja Saravaka. Thank you, thank you, thank you for that donation and for showing love. We appreciate you so much. As I was saying, though, watch that video, Debunked 5 Myths About Israel Palestine. It'll allow you to break down talking points, allow you to get into the mix. Also share that. That's how, if we want to do political education on Israel and Palestine, we have to share content that helps people make sense of it. So please take that video and share it. That's all I'm saying. Share the video. Feel free to hit that Cash App button if you want to drop something in our coffers to help us build what we're doing here on the station, on the channel. Otherwise, y'all have a good night, happy new year, and keep fighting. Peace.